Your legacy lives on in your children and grandchildren. This statement is written on my grandma's gravestone. My grandma was a warrior. She endured so much in her lifetime, and yet she never stopped loving God and others. She showed me what it meant to trust God in all circumstances and to never give up. She was a Jesus-loving fighter, and I hope I can be like her. My grandma had what you could call a rough life. She was an orphan as a child and lived in an orphanage and a foster home. Although her childhood was painful, she pushed through. When my grandma grew up, she married my grandpa, and a few years later, my mom was born. Unfortunately, my grandpa left my grandma and my mom, and my grandma was left to be a single parent. She showed my mom that although their circumstances were far from pleasant, God was always with them and that his plan was perfect. My mom grew up to be an amazing, God-honoring woman because of my grandma's faith and love for God and others. My grandma was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and fought hard. Through all of this, my grandma could have easily given up, but she always says that God never makes mistakes, and so her cancer was happening for a reason. She never stopped loving others and giving, even when she felt incredibly sick. I think it is God's gift to me, but I hardly remember my grandma being sick and frail. Although her cancer did change her life drastically, she didn't let it control her. She passed away in 2008. My grandma endured countless hardships throughout her life. She could have easily given up and decided that her life was too hard. She could have thrown an attitude and spent her life wishing for different circumstances. But she didn't, and that's what makes her a hero. At the end of her life, 10 days before she died, she said, I could have had a really cruddy life, but I didn't. She didn't let her circumstances dictate God's goodness, and that's one of the biggest lessons she taught me. Grandma, I promise you, your legacy absolutely does live on in your children, your grandchildren, and now your great-grandchildren. Thank you.